I'm delighted to do this introduction, though it's a bit sad for me because I don't live near Keith and Stella anymore. But Keith Castle and Stella Hayes, I lived for about a decade in the centre on two properties that were very closely connected to the place that Keith and Stella live and the life there. And my life was made extremely rich by the richness of what they do. And I'm going to briefly say something of what I think they do, and they might think this is wrong, and then they can correct it. But I think they live out this rare thing, which is a connection to country, and then a connection to people of the country, particularly the First Nations people. And then they connect those two things to both a life of faith and art. And it's a rich and sort of tangled and I think extremely difficult thing to do in the centre. And most people don't do it in the way they do it. And it's very costly. But they've lived this out for a long time. And then this thing they do is that they're really hospitable. And so many, many, many other people get drawn into this thing they're living in all sorts of ways. And I think they've had a very big influence, both in the centre and across Australia. And some of the things they've done are extremely well known, and some of them are very quiet, and some of them the effects are manifestly apparent, and some of them I don't think anyone would really know the effect. And I think all of those are equally important and really matter. And some of the things you might already know about are the Edge of the Sacred conferences, which are just pure eremos in my view, but also their work with the Central Australian Aboriginal Women's Choir. And they've done a recent, really exciting work about retelling the story of John Flynn with First Nations views in. But there's many, many other things they do. And I feel that the heart of what Eremos is about is the heart of what they actually live. So I think it's really lovely we've got them today. And we'll only hear a little bit of what they do. But could you note down questions you have? And you might want to send them in to Kate Scholl in the chat, or just note them because there'll be a really decent Q&A time at the end of their talk. But over to Keith and Stella.
All right. Thank you for that really beautiful introduction, Celia. That's really lovely. So anyway, and thank you, Kate, for the invitation to do this talk this afternoon. It's lovely.
Can't hear.
Oh, you can't hear?
I can hear.
You're a little bit soft, Stella.
A little bit soft. Got to talk up a bit and come a bit closer to the mic.
That would be good.
All right, maybe we'll just have to. Is that loud enough?
Not quite.
Is that good?
I think that's good for me. Have you got headphones, Elaine, you can put in?
No.
Improve is your sound turned up all the way on your computer?
Usually.
Okay.
Is your sound up?
Yep, 100%.
Okay, I'll try and talk loud and just intervene if I'm sort of dropping off into quiet. Keith's got a much louder voice than me, so anyway, I was just saying to Celia, thank you for the beautiful invitation, beautiful introduction, and thank you to Kate for the invitation to speak to you this afternoon. So we'll say greeting, hello, Wooda. In Arrernte is hello, Wooda. And we're talking to you from Mbandwa, Alice Springs. We'd like to have been talking to you from the block where we live, but our internet's been a little wobbly, so we're actually sitting in the Uniting Church office and op-shop stuff all around us at the moment, but at least the internet's reliable. But yes, so we're talking to you from the Arrernte, the good country of the Arrernte people. And we acknowledge their long history of taking care of this country for tens of thousands of years. And we also acknowledge the ongoing importance of connection to this country, to this Arrernte, this good country to Arrernte people. And we've had the privilege of knowing quite a few Arrernte elders in our 20 years of connection to the Arrernte to this country, and we're very grateful to all that they have taught us. And we're also grateful to First Nations mob from other areas as well, other language groups, particularly the Pinjarra and the Walpri mob. Anyway, and so look, to start with, I think we would like to give a very visual acknowledgement to some of the people that have most influenced us. So this is a picture of two beautiful senior women, MK Turner and Margie Heffernan. MK's got an Order of Australia medal. Both these women sadly are passed away, and both these women were very significant to us. They both were involved in documenting Arrernte language. They've both written books, MK writing on what it means to be an Aboriginal person, Iwina Chercha, and Margie writing a book, Gathering Sticks, her story. And both these women have been incredibly gracious to us in terms of teaching us and participating in things that we've run. And so people that have come may well have met them. As I said, sadly, they both passed away. Both these women were very strong in their culture, but also very strong Catholics. In fact, MK was a person that was to meet Pope John Paul when he visited Mbandua, Alice Springs. So, yeah. And this is John Kavanagh. And John and his family lived on the block with us for about 13 years. And he took us out to his country a little bit east of Alice on many occasions. This is showing us where you can find water in the rock in quite unlikely places if you know country well. And this is John talking to Keith on his country, you know, telling us a lot in a very visceral way of how to pay attention to country. And John, we started doing it with John, and then other people have picked it up. John has been running spirit journeys from Mbandua, Alice Springs, out into his country, a bit of east of here, up till this year. Unfortunately, he's had to stop because he's not well and he's lost both his legs to diabetes.
Just on that, that image there sort of just reminds me of how important it is for Aboriginal people, particularly around gender, that he would talk to the men and the women would talk to the women. And so when you went out on country, he would draw alongside, and he loved talking to white fellas and drawing them into a deeper understanding of what it was like to listen to the country.
Yeah. There's a picture of him talking to one of the Spirit Journeys group on our...
And there's a lot of buffle there, which I'll talk about later.
Yeah. This is an old picture. That tree's got no buffalo grass around it now anymore. Then other group that's had a big influence on us, of course, has been the Central Australian Aboriginal Women's Choir. This is the choir singing on our block with the hill there behind in the background. This choir set up by Maurice Stewart there in the front conducting, and Keith and I have had the privilege of accompanying this choir on many travels around Australia, but also overseas to Germany and to America, and Keith even...
they for some reason or other, they overlook the fact that I'm a male and I'm not Aboriginal and asked me to sing with the choir. So it's probably the greatest honour of my life that I sing with them.
Yeah, and these women too. These are Pitjantjatjara and Western Arrernte women. They sing Christian hymns. Well, there's a couple of men in there too. They sing Christian hymns. They're very strong Lutherans, and but they're also very strong in their own culture. So once again, they're kind of holding a lot of their own culture, but also holding the Christian story important to them.
Yes, I often think Aboriginal people, all of their mythological stories as their Old Testament. And then when Jesus turned up, they thought, yes, we get this, love, that's really important.
Yeah, this is the choir on tour in America. Yeah. And this is another person we want to acknowledge, him and also actually his father who's passed away. This is Ben Buzzacott. His father, Uncle Kevin, passed away while they're traditional owners for the country where we live. And they have been very gracious to us in kind of particularly giving us consent to be able to walk around on the hills, because we don't actually own the hill beside the block, and to be able to walk around, and very appreciative of Keith for doing looking after it, and we can take people for walks on it and stuff. And Ben, as you can see, is a musician and one of the many Aboriginal mob here that love country music. And this is him actually singing at one of the many events we've had on the block as part of Desert Song Festival. And he and actually Warren H. Williams, another local Aboriginal man who sings country music and other music too. And Warren lived with us for about a year, and a lot of Aboriginal mob around here love country music. So yeah,
I've played harmonica with him on
yeah,
occasions.
yeah. Yeah. Celia alluded to conferences, the sacred conferences we've run. This photo was taken at one of those conferences with three very special Aboriginal people who have had a huge impact on us.
On Australia.
On Australia too. Well, in the middle there is Miriam Rose Ungama from Daly River. She's a top end woman, and we probably today think about all people up in top end at the moment with the cyclone that's been going through there. So yeah, and MK with Keith there, who's sadly passed away, and Japanunka Granite's a Walpri man who also has sadly passed away. And in fact, so this is Miriam Rose speaking at the conference. She's wearing a jumper there that my mum knitted for me. But like a lot of people from top end, they come down and they never bring enough warm clothes, and so you can give them warm clothes there. And Miriam, of course, you know, she was Senior Australian of the Year a year or so ago, and has spoken so much on the concept of the diri, the deep listening to country, that is even taught in Catholic schools and stuff. And yes, as Keith said, a big influence on Australia. We actually went up and visited her at Daly River, and this is Keith there and my other family there, that we're being welcomed to country there by, you actually have to go down to the river. Apparently they know where the crocs are and they aren't. And so we actually went up and spent some time there with her. That saw us, and that's a daughter and her daughter, and in the middle there is Clayton, who is our Arrernte boy that my daughter Emily on the edge there has helped raise to adulthood. My daughter Emily, we're actually in her office. She's actually the Uniting Church minister here at the moment in Alice Springs. So yeah. So anyway, so the understandings that we are going to share with you in this talk have largely come from these people. Anyway, so we'll get on with the talk now. So I'm going to start out by just reading a Mary Oliver poem. I actually read a poem most mornings, and this was actually the poem that I read this morning. It starts out, so, no, I'd never been to this country before. No, I didn't know where the roads would lead me. No, I didn't intend to turn back. I just thought that was really, for us, when we first left Sydney, so about 20 years ago, Keith and I bought 20 acres, about 20k west of Alice Springs. We had actually been here a couple of times before, staying at Campfire in the Heart, and it was actually David Woods from Campfire in the Heart who told us about the block, and which we ended up buying. Anyway, this is the block when we first moved there. That's looking down at the house where we live from the mountain beside it. This place has got a very long history, particularly geologically, and it's also got a long history in terms of its significance to Aboriginal people. It's an aerial view there of the block there. In more recent history, it was part of a cattle station that had run as Alice Springs Dairy before deregulation. And the buildings that where we live had been a part of the cattle station, carved out as a sort of a tourist area. There was a restaurant and shop and caravan park area. It was all pretty run down when we bought it and hadn't been running as that at all. And that also, it was totally covered in buffel grass, and Keith will talk more about buffel grass later. The cattle station was called White Gums because, as you can see in this photo, there are a lot of beautiful white gums, or sometimes called ghost gums, in the area. And when we asked M.K. Turner, who was in some of those pictures before, what we should call our 20 acres carved out, she said, "Call it ilumbri lumba," which is the Arrernte word for white gums. Like a lot of our Aboriginal languages, they repeat the word to pluralize it. So ilumbra is a white gum. So the block where we live, we call ilumbri ilumba. Anyway, I thought that the way I would go through this is I wrote a poem about living on the place. Now, I'm no poet, but I often look for ways to just express myself. And so I thought I would go through this. I'd read this poem, then go through some of the story behind the poem, and then read it again at the end. So the poem is called Wise Old Woman Country. We live pressed against this old crumbling hill, like children held close to Nana's dry breast. No round rolling mound, yet we have our fill, as a soft heart beats in her craggy chest. We live where the world is left to grow old, stretch out and warm brittle bones in the sun, while we flit around and hear Nana scold. Sit still and listen, then real work is done. We live where old stories are told by rocks and danced in the moonlight by ghost gum trees, where wind whispers songs and we can eavesdrop on old Nana crooning her memories. We live here together, Nana and us, through the purge and surge of fire and flood, in fluffs of flowers and whirlwinds of dust, steadily weathering breathings of love. So that's our house there, pressed up against the hill. So we live pressed against this old crumbling hill. That's the picture of the hills there. Our 20 acres is at the base of the West Macdonnell Ranges in Central Australia, or Chorracha, the Arrernte word for that area, for the ranges. Chorracha is one of the oldest mountain ranges in the world. Some of the rocks in the mountains are up to 900 million years old. The range itself was formed about 350 million years ago by a kind of a huge eruption that happened for reasons they still don't totally know. And the range probably reached the heights of ranges like the Himalayas. And then over 350 million years, not much has happened other than the steady, slow erosion. And these ranges that we see now are the eroded ranges of what was once a huge mountain range. And they also, because the rivers over so many millions of years flowed down the ranges, the rivers actually made gaps in the ranges. And as you look down there, you can see a road going through, and that's going through the gap right beside our house, which in Arrernte is called Mbwalcharandaya. In the English-speaking mob call it Honeymoon Gap. Anyway, I'm not wanting to give you a big geology lesson here, but just to give you a sense of the kind of deep time that we're talking about and the perspective that living beside something so old gives you, and it makes you realize that our 20 years in this place is just a blink of an eye. And it's very humbling. And certainly at the moment, a group of us in church are working our way through the book of Ecclesiastes. And when it sort of says things like, yeah, vanity, vanity, all is vanity, generations come and generations go, but the earth remains forever. For us living beside this old range, it's very real, very visceral, very real. So when we moved here from Sydney, that's me on top of the mountain there. When we moved here from Sydney, I was in my 40s and Keith was in his 50s, and our kids had all grown up and left home. And Keith actually made the observation that living beside these mountains was like living beside a wise old woman. And I took some comfort in that, because it's good to know that he was willing to hang in there with an old woman. So it was that metaphor that inspired this poem I wrote. And we kind of talked about how, yeah, on the East Coast, the hills are all green and rolling and fertile. And I guess we were coming to the end of all our fertile years, and so this old range has felt like a good place to age beside. And then the reason I say a bit about her soft heartbeats in her craggy chest comes from the often expressed belief that people visiting us sometimes say that they thought that the heart of Australia was sort of like harsh and unwelcoming, and sometimes it's even referred to as a dead heart. Which is not our experience, you know. Now, there is drought and there is death. There is rain, and when it rains, stuff just seems to spring up out of nowhere. There are heavy frosts in winter, the temperatures drop below 0, and in summer, days over 40, like today, actually. So there's stuff that's tough, but there's also this beautiful fragility, like in the flowers at times, and yeah, and although the rain doesn't fall often and it falls unpredictably, because this desert is so old, the plants have had a chance to adapt. And so we've got this amazing array of plants, and wherever you look, you can see signs of life and signs of death, you know, the dead wood and the new young plants. This photo, and I didn't arrange it, I just took it. This photo is on our block, or on the hill beside our block, and it's of some dead mulga, and the little ferns coming up beside it are called resurrection ferns. And these ferns, most of the time, literally look like dead sticks, and you just kind of crunch around and there's these little dead sticks. But within hours of it raining, they just go green like this and just sort of come up, and they come up around the mulga particularly, and it always excites us. They give us a lot of inspiration. And I guess this sort of, in some ways, to me, is this the whole Christian story of you know, the wider cycles of life and of life and death, and the and resurrection, that it's all very visceral and very real around us here. Yeah, so we live where the world is left to grow old, and you know, this old mountain range, and where branches falling down and trees falling down. We this is on the block. This tree fell down apparently the night of a Paul Kelly concert on the block. It was fallen down when we got here. But the branches are all, the dead wood all forms habitat for life, and also feeds into the soil. So we live where the world is left to grow old, while we flit around, and I often do really feel like I flit around like the finches and the wagtails, all the little birds. So yeah, because even though we're living in this this beautiful old place, both of us get very busy, and I still wish we could not get so busy, but we've both had jobs, and Keith's still working. I'm still working largely full-time as a psychologist, and Keith works in community development and management. But also, as Celia said, we do offer hospitality, and so there's often people coming and going, staying there, or we're hosting workshops or things, and certainly sometimes we host really big events, like weddings, conferences, concerts. Yeah, and Keith might talk a bit more about some of them. And certainly when I'm running around like a chook with my head cut off, I just sometimes find myself looking up at Arrernte, at that hill, and to kind of, it can almost like feel that verse, feel Nana scold. I can almost feel like, you know, what are you doing, Stella? You know, it's as if this really matters. You know, this will come and this will pass, and it does actually help me, ground me a bit, to not get too caught up in the importance of everything that you're doing. So yeah. That's so one of the things, practices each morning. I do try to sit and do some prayer and meditation, and also we sit a lot on our veranda. We've got a wonderful veranda, and we have a wonderful bird bath that you can see in this picture, and through the day the birds are coming and going, and then often more later in the evenings the kangaroos and wallabies come down and drink from it. And so just being able to sit on the veranda and look at these things is important. So yeah, so we live where old stories are told by rocks and danced in the moonlight by ghost scum trees. So yeah, the old rocks telling stories and the ghost scums there in the moonlight. So we've definitely come to understand that Aboriginal people don't write their stories down like our culture, but they read their songs and stories in the formations and rhythms of countries. And these stories are important to them on many levels for, navigation and finding food and water, and how to understand boundaries and who's responsible for what. But the stories they tell also contain, history, myth, moral wisdom, a bit like our Old Testament. And these stories are actually, they are kind of read and sung in the actual landscape. And so we've come to understand that Aboriginal people clearly see country as communicating as much as we're communicating, and it does seem to us now too, listening, that many scientists are coming to the view that our human consciousness is a part of a wider body of consciousness that includes all of nature, and that perhaps there is something akin to mind in matter. And these are just big questions, but certainly I think we've come to really feel that, and that's certainly how Aboriginal people live. We have been told some of the stories about the block of land where we live. It is part of a Arrernte dreaming track, and Arrerntes are a large goanna here. And this Arrernte story is a really big story of conflict that ends in a battle at Simpson's Gap, which is only just up the road from us. We've also been told the story that the block where we live is right next to Honeymoon Gap in Puelchalandaya was a women's camping spot. So when Aboriginal people would be coming in to Mbantua, and people would sometimes come to this part of the world because there's really good permanent water holes there and plants there that don't exist anywhere for 1,000 km in any other direction. It's a bit of an oasis area. So when people would come from other areas would come to Mbantua, the men would be permitted to go through Heavy Tree Gap, which is the main gap that sort of goes into Alice Springs, but the women weren't permitted to go through there because there were Chiringa sacred objects in that gap. The women would have to come to Puelchalandaya, Honeymoon Gap, which is the gap right where we live, and the women would camp there, and their smoke would let people know that they were there and wait for permission to go in. But while they were camped there, they would dance, and these trees that we're looking at here, these ghost gums, these trees are actually, Warren Williams told us these trees are the dancing women, and so apparently men are not allowed to pull any of the branches down from these trees. These were a couple of young women that lived on the block with us, taking the dancing women and the trees. So yeah, we have probably about a dozen people live on the block, and different people have come and gone over the years. But yeah, these stories are not ours, but I've had a sense almost of we've been allowed to eavesdrop on them. So hence that line, we can eavesdrop. And then the final verse, we live through the purge and surge of fire and flood. So this here is a picture of one of our first big fires.
Yeah, I started that fire. I was down the bottom of the hill there. That was in January. It was about 40 degrees, and I was mowing the grass, and a spark hit the buffle, and within about 30 seconds, the fire was going up the hill. It was a tad embarrassing. But we did manage to get it out. But it did remind us of just, it's an exciting place to live. Yeah, lots of things happen, and yeah, fires, floods, it's all happened. But the other thing is that was the start of my buffel career. A good friend who was living on the block at the time, Tim, and he showed me how to, he's a biologist, and he showed me how we could spray the reshooting buffle, and then so there's not really any buffle on that hill anymore as a result. So in a way, the fire did us a favour.
Yeah, you can see all the grass at the front there. That's the buffel grass, and then above that fire. And yeah, that's the first of. There's been a few fires we've fought on the block. They're not the same as fires on the East Coast. So you know, there's not the density of
grass
vegetation. They're grass fires, so you can get out and do something because the fire brigade don't come out and do very much. This is a little team of us. We fought that fire doing bucket of water relays and backpacks with water. So yeah. Yeah, oh, that's a picture of the fire there. We now actually deliberately, well, Keith deliberately lights fires and we control burn. That we've started.
I deny that because I'm not allowed to, but
no, he doesn't.
That,
no.
I don't know why Stella said that.
You
Yeah.
didn't do
And
that.
10 minutes away.
Okay, then. Okay, that's a sunset of the fire. And then I'll compare that to this photo, the same sort of area. If you just sort of, that's after fire, and then this is the flood. So we live next to Roe Creek, a river, and this is the river in flood. And sometimes the river flows very strongly. That's the river flowing through the gap there, and yeah, it's come pretty close to the that sometimes it even carves out a big swimming hole just right opposite the gap there, and people from town come out and swim. And that's it can't begin to explain how excited people in Central Australia get when there's been heavy rain and the rivers are flowing. And then, of course, when we've had rain, and the last bit of that poem, you know, the fluffs of flowers, we get just these extraordinary, delicate flowers that can come out. These are Tylotus or mullas, and they're just these little fluff flowers, and they can look like little light cloves and so delicate. And so even though there's a lot of harshness, there's also this delicacy. Anyway, I won't reread the poem because we're running out of time, and I'll hand over to Keith.
So we got here, and yeah, as Stella talked about, it did feel like moving to old woman country, and there's been something that's sort of, it's been a guiding light for both of us. What I wanted to do now is just talk about two things that was sort of helping me try and can I get rid of some of these things so I can see the screen? The basically using track making and also buffling to sort of try and be being on country and engaging country. And in track making, one of the things I guess that I love tracks. I love bushwalking. I love trying to find my way in the bush and so on, and making tracks. And even just these pictures there sort of evokes to me, oh, I want to find out where does the track go. And so whether it's riding, walking, and so on, it's important. And there was an opportunity to make tracks here that wasn't so available to me elsewhere. And there were certain things about being engaged on country. Where should the track go? How do the animals move around this space? How do I make the least impact in what I'm doing? How do I make sure it drains effectively so it doesn't wash away? How do I make it last without using outside materials? And then sometimes I would think, I don't know if anyone else ever comes here. So it was this sense of it being quite a quiet, private place. Yet for all of that, there is so much life around me. And that's what these 20 years have been slowly learning more and more about. It doesn't need humans around. There's plenty of life there. And this country is old and sacred. And so that's sort of, those things guided my track making. And I've made a few tracks, both near us, and then also anyone wants to go for a 15-kilometre walk, I've made a track from our place, and Stella mentioned this, and Walter and Dyer, right through into Heavy Tree Gap in Alice Springs. And it's a lovely walk. Probably needs a bit of work on it at the moment, but it's a lovely walk. The second thing was similarly with buffle, and I talked about the fire and so on, and you can see this picture here. Actually, the buffle's quite an attractive plant. In fact, I'm a great admirer of buffle. It's a very, very effective plant. But at the same time, as you can see on the picture on the right, it can be very, very overwhelming. And at times, particularly after rain, the whole block could have looked like that. And it's and each one of those heads holds about 200 seed heads. And if you think of just that little bit there, there's probably, 10,000 seed heads there. And if you look at the hundreds and hundreds of square kilometers, the number is just ridiculous. So it's a very effective colonizer, very strong root pattern. And it was really helpful for the farmers, particularly down on the flats, because it allowed them to sort of feed cattle.
It's probably just worth saying that the buffle was introduced. It's an African grass, and it was introduced by the cattle farmers, and it was declared a weed in Northern Territory last year.
Yeah. So anyway, some of the aspects around, again, all of this was me trying to sort of think a bit differently about being on country, other than being a crazy white fella trying to do something. And the 100 acres I worked with, most of it's Aboriginal land, but it's defined by mountains, not fences. And the whole process, I sometimes call myself Sisyphus, because the task is never finished. And I don't know how many times I've done the task and then I've come back after the rain and I've got to start all over again. But there's something humbling in that continuity of it. Whereas I've been brought up to say, I'll do this, I'll work hard and I will have success. This is, it doesn't let me do that. And so I've got down the bottom there, it's a way of life, not just a task. And then once I've done it, I can get on with life again. It's an ongoing thing. Another thing I've found is that I will pick certain each day, if I'm out weeding, I'll pick an area and I'll say, this is where I'm working today. And the fact that it could be buffle right next to where that area I'm working is irrelevant to me, because I want to focus on the area that I'm working on. And that actually lets me enjoy that day, even though it's alongside areas that will need attention, something else. And I've found that in that, my intimacy with country deepens more as I spend more time. Why won't that go down to the next one?
I think that is the last one.
No, it's not.
Oh.
What? 1, 2, 1. That one. And so just taking these little steps, I've thought more and more about the spiritual aspect of listening to country, being on country. And the first thing is, it's become really important to me. I don't own this place. In fact, won't be too long and I'll be dead, as Stella alluded to. I'm a caretaker here, and that's an Aboriginal way of thinking. And the grass removal is a task. It's a focus. I'm trying to achieve something, but there's a spiritual intimacy I've found has been an outcome for me, that it actually spiritually feels nurturing. I get to watch native plants return. It's just remarkable that I can remove buffle that's been growing in an area for 40 years, and I remove it. And sometimes if you get good rain straight after, all of the native plants come back up. How does that happen? I don't know. Often when I'm feeling really stressed, the best thing I can do is just go out and walk on the country, even if I'm not doing anything, but it does settle my spirit. And I've thought it's not gardening I'm involved with, because I'm not planting. I mean, I do a bit of that, but mostly I'm releasing the land and let nature do the work. And so that that sense of the country does its own work. And the other thing that's, and this has become a really fundamental spiritual truth for me, and the more I pay attention, the better my attention gets. And I find if I'm walking in an area, I can see an area I've weeded, and I'll look over, and it might be 20 meters away, and I'll just see something I can't even define, but I'll say, I think there's some buffalo over there. And I'll walk over, and I'd say 8 times out of 10 there is. And the thing I love about this is there's no cleverness on my part. It purely happens because my eyes, my brain have spent so much time paying attention that it provides this information, and I see something that I can't even define what I'm. If someone said, "Oh, what can you see?" And I can't tell. I just think there's buffalo there, it could be quite small. And it's just, I just love the fact that life allows you to sort of draw on it in that way. And I also better understand that everything is connected. And there's lots of people who've talked about this in different ways. And I sort of feel that as I spend time on country, that everything relies on everything else. And I also love patterns, and I might just talk a little bit about patterns. But the sort of final thing on this, just this rationale, is as I've walked through these things and listened to the people that Stella was talking about, and talking about deep listening, and just that whole concept, deep listening, is just such an exquisite image for me. And also Aboriginal people talk about everything as connected. And in fact, John Coleman did a lovely song about everything is connected that I worked with. Anyway, and then and paying attention, and that whole paying attention is, I actually think, spreads beyond just, oh, well, okay, I'll get better at finding buffalo if I spend up 1,000 ridiculous hours doing it. But I think it's broader than that, and it's a deeper thing, is that if we all think of ourselves, and the things that we pay attention to are the things that we have interest in, and the more we pay attention, the better we get at it. And I think that's is a really important truth for us, particularly Western minds, to think about. And the other thing I'd want to say is, when we pay attention, and often you sort of read all the advertisements in the paper about tourism here, and they put all these pictures up of all the things you're going to see and so on. And yet I think we often miss the small in seeking for the grand. And I suppose just the small things that I've come to see and love is just a really nurturing thing. And as Stella mentioned, noticing and celebrating life and death. There is no scene in Central Australia where you don't see the two things coexisting in the one scene. And one of the, just finishing on this thing about the Aboriginal thing, I just love the fact that a tree lives in one spot all its life. And you'd sort of think from our perspective, well, there's not a lot of future in that. And yet this tree may have been there for 200 years and influenced 20 generations of people. The tree can have a pretty important role. And the final thing, John Kavanagh, interestingly, as I was talking to him when we went on spirit journeys and so on, he said he'd never been to Uluru. Now, Alice Springs is 400 kilometres from Uluru, so it's not very far. John's lived in Central Australia all his life, and the reason he hasn't been to Uluru, he's never been invited. And so for him, it's not this need, oh, I've got to go and see this, I've got to do that. It's like, no, that will happen if the time is right. And so there's this patience to just accept what is. And I just think all of these things has been a really helpful learning process for both Stella and I. And so, yeah. Now, I was going to do one final thing before we finish. I think I've gone the wrong way. What have I done? No, that's right. Here we go. I want to just talk about patterns, and these are photos I take, and it's not important whether you like the photos or not, but what, in fact, both Stella and I do is when we're walking, we just sort of look at the small things around us and just look at the patterns. And rocks are beautiful. Those gorgeous little prickly cones were just exquisite. And then always wood just never disappoints. It's always got a story to tell you. And here, if you just looked at the photo on the left, you'd say, what on earth is that? But then when you look over to the right, you can see it's a log where the sand has got into that log, and just the patterns of life that are just sitting there waiting for someone to come and say hello. And these are some other things here, walking along a beach, and you see the what do you call it?
Kelp.
The kelp on the ground, and just making such beautiful shapes and patterns. And then my other thing, which you might think, well, what on earth would you bother? But I've got a real desire. Whenever I'm walking along a track, you'll often walk over old tree roots, and I just find as I'm walking over the tree roots, and often they're shined by the shoe that I've been walking, or people have walked over, and they make these patterns, and I just become quite compulsive. Now, if I change the angle of this framing, would that look better or worse, and what? And I don't know if that looks better or worse, but it's just, it's not about whether I've been successful, but it's more about just paying attention and looking at what we're in. And it's something I think we can all do. It's not something that we can't do. You can do it in a suburban place in the city. You can do it anywhere. But the more you do it, I think the more you get interested in doing it. And I think that'll do.
And in a sense,